There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, that are dreamt of in your philosophy. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? The wilderness of North America is home to some pretty scary animals that you probably don't want to run into once the sun's gone down. Bears, foxes, wolves, bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions, just to give a few examples. What if I told you that the most terrifying predator in the forests of North America isn't any of these creatures? What if I told you that wolves aren't even the scariest canine that calls the woods home? As unbelievable as this might sound, as crazy as I might sound, for decades now there have been reports of gigantic bipedal creatures with canine heads and humanoid bodies stalking the forests of states like Kentucky, Louisiana, Tennessee, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Mississippi. Those aren't even the only states they've been sighted in, they're just the states where they've had the most reported sightings. These creatures are said to be over 7 feet tall, standing upright, covered in thick fur from head to toe, have the claws and fangs befitting a carnivorous super predator. Perhaps strangest of all, they are said to possess physiques that belong on an Olympia stage. Now, they've been called a lot of things over the years, but at some point, people settled on referring to them as dogmen. If you don't believe me, go and search up the term Dogman Cryptid. If you don't include the word cryptid, there's a children's book series named Dogman, as well as a couple of movies with the same name that tend to dominate search results, but those are both very clearly not what we're talking about here. If you do this, you'll find countless stories from people claiming to have seen these entities. You'll find video and audio interviews from these eyewitnesses in some cases, and now and again, you'll even find someone willing to attach their name and face to an encounter with what seems to be nothing less than a real-life monster. Deep in the woods, people are seeing something, and whatever that something is, it definitely isn't more scared of us than we are of it. Now, I would like to make something perfectly clear. This video is not about a creepypasta or an ARG. It's not some kind of guerrilla marketing for an upcoming horror movie, nor is it any other type of internet campfire story. I'm not playing a part here, showing off my creative writing skills, or sharing the made-up lore of a monster from some fictional universe. If you think at the end of the video I'll reveal I was just kidding, and that this was a ruse to see what I could get people to believe, you are going to be disappointed. There really are people out there that claim to have seen these creatures. After spending years looking into the evidence for myself, I personally am of the belief that the entity known as Dogman really does have some sort of population within certain parts of the United States, and that a sizable number, obviously not all, of the people that claim to have seen them are telling the truth about what they witnessed. Some of you watching this video may have heard of the Dogman before. Some of you likely have not, and plenty of you are probably rolling your eyes at the idea that I actually believe in the existence of giant bipedal wolfmen. Some of you are likely fellow believers. Some of you might even be what are known as knowers, people that have been unfortunate enough to actually meet one of these creatures while deep in the woods. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic, all I can do is ask you to keep an open mind while watching. You might see things differently by the time the video is over. Should I fail my endeavor of persuading you about the Dogman's existence, I'll leave the comments section open so you can go ahead and call me whatever you want. I've got thick skin. But before you say anything below, wait till the evening and see if you find yourself checking to make sure your doors are locked tonight, jumping whenever you hear an unrecognized sound from outside. If you're scared to look through the window into the darkness, have to fear that you'll see a Dogman grinning back at you. For a quick overview before I really start getting into the finer details, Dogman is what's known as a cryptid. A cryptid is a creature that's said to exist, has had sightings and evidence for its existence, but has never been definitively proven to exist. The animals that are categorized as cryptids range from the very mundane, like the ivory-billed woodpecker, to the seemingly very fantastical, like Mothman or the Jersey Devil, to wherever on that spectrum you want to place Dogman. The many eyewitness descriptions of Dogman that have come out over the years give us a general idea of what these creatures look like. Physically speaking, Dogmen are described as humanoid creatures that have canine heads. They're very tall when standing up. 6 feet is pretty much the absolute lowest height estimate I've heard for an adult Dogman. The highest numbers are somewhere north of 10 feet, but those could very easily be overestimates that come from frightened eyewitnesses. They also have claws and fangs befitting an apex predator, or a real-life monster. Dogman weight estimates vary, and in all fairness, I think people seconds removed from learning that monsters really exist probably aren't getting the best headspace to be guessing the weight of these things, but most eyewitnesses place a 7-foot-tall dogman at about 400 pounds. You get some estimates that are lower than that, and I think this is due to people not being aware of a mathematical principle called the square-cube law. The square-cube law makes it so that if something is scaled up vertically, its weight must increase by the proportionate amount its height has increased by cubed in order to maintain its proportions. So if you took a 6-foot-tall, 200-pound man and made him 12 feet tall, he would have to weigh 1,600 pounds to retain his proportions, since 2 cubed equals 8. The average wolf would be about 5 feet tall in its hind legs. When you scale that up to a 7+ foot tall dogman, you can start to see where the 400-pound figure comes from. Dogmen are almost universally, although there are exceptions, said to be covered head to toe in fur, with the fur colors that are reported being black, gray, brown, reddish brown, and white, although white is far and away the rarest. In terms of eye color, the most commonly reported colors are yellow, red, orange, amber, blue, and pitch black. Most, although not all, Dogman encounters are said to have occurred while it was night, or at the very least dark out, which some believe is evidence that these creatures are either nocturnal or crepuscular. There are multiple reports of dogmen climbing trees and even swinging from particularly thick branches with extreme grace and ease, and it's possibly part of what has allowed these creatures to remain undetected for as long as they have. Nobody's looking for them up in the trees. I think it could also be part of the reason for the incredibly muscular upper bodies these things are said to have. If you're basically doing pull-ups all day every day on a 400-pound frame, well, you're going to get really jacked really fast. Although dogmen are typically portrayed as exclusively moving on 2 legs, there are many reports of them moving on all 4s, as well as switching back and forth between the 2 stances. In fact, some eyewitnesses have reported that what they saw was initially moving quadrupedally and they thought it was just a gigantic wolf until it stood upright. Although they are pretty much universally referred to as dogmen, there are numerous reports of specimens that are visibly female in the same way other canines would be, which makes sense. You would obviously need both males and females for a species to survive. Despite their monstrous appearance, I do believe that these dogmen are natural animals and they reproduce just like other species. There are also reports of juvenile dogmen, dog boys you could call them, although they're very, very uncommon. This could be owed to the possibility that, like actual wolves, these creatures will stay in the den with their mothers until they've reached physical maturity. In addition to the more obvious physical features, there are a few strange details about these creatures that appear in an overwhelming number of Dogman encounters. The first thing that pretty much every eyewitness reports hearing is nothing at all. It's said that the woods go silent in the minutes leading up to an encounter with a dogman, possibly other forest animals trying to slip under the radar of the apex of apex predators. Some people have likened the area going silent to an office break room going quiet when the boss walks in. Many eyewitnesses have also reported there being a strong and completely awful smell emanating from what they encountered, with some describing it as being similar to the smell of a wet dog but turned up to 11. Another strange detail that appears often in Dogman encounters is the cracking or popping sound that they make when switching from quadrupedal to bipedal motion, and vice versa. No one knows exactly what causes this, but I have some thoughts that I'll share later on. These things are definitely carnivores, with many people reporting seeing them feasting on their prey. A significant number of Dogman encounters occur while people are driving or near roads. There are also reports of these things eating roadkill, and I think that they might just realize if they hang out near a road for long enough, they'll probably find a quick and easy dinner for the night. There are also many reports of dogmen running parallel to cars on the road and even being able to keep up with vehicles that are going 60+ miles per hour on the highway. This might sound unbelievable, but keep in mind that wolves are able to run 35 miles per hour in short bursts. If you were to scale their leg lengths up to the ones that dogmen are said to have, 60 miles per hour suddenly doesn't sound too out of the question. There are reports of these things actually getting along fine with wolves, but not dogs. There are a lot of stories that mention outdoor pets going missing prior to Dogman sightings, and it's said that an area having an abundance of coyotes causes the likelihood of it being home to a dogman to skyrocket, although no one seems to have an explanation for why that is. As I mentioned earlier, most of the information that we have about these entities comes from eyewitness encounters that have gone on for decades all over the country. There are loads of these that have been posted online, many of which even include an audio portion from the eyewitness, giving a testimony of what they saw. I make a note of this because the emotion that some of these people tell their stories with seems to be irreplicable by anyone but the best trained actors. Now, this isn't to say that all of these stories are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but the sheer number of them does lead me to believe that a solid percentage of these people saw something, or at an absolute minimum believe that they saw something. What that exact percentage is, I can't tell you. Less than 100%, people do lie. More than 1%, well, yeah, I feel confident saying that. More than half, well, I could really go either way at that point. Of the stories from people that aren't knowingly lying for whatever reason, I don't think that there are nearly as many misidentifications as skeptics believe there to be. Many, likely an outright supermajority, of these eyewitnesses are also experienced outdoorsmen and women. They are hunters, fishers, campers, lumberjacks, what have you. They are not people that will panic and jump to wild and fantastical conclusions about what they saw when they run into any wildlife that you can find in a zoology textbook. They are without a doubt people that can tell the difference between a bear with mange or a bear standing upright and a gigantic bipedal wolf man. While many of these people loved the great outdoors before their Dogman sightings, afterwards many report being hesitant towards and often outright afraid of wandering into the deep woods. Sometimes even scared of walking to the end of their driveway to take out the trash once the sun has gone down. This is both very unfortunate and very understandable. Even if you've had a lifelong love of being out in the wild, meeting one of these creatures and undergoing the realization that humans aren't always at the top of the food chain will put quite a damper on that love, to say the very least. Some people have even reported developing what seems to be PTSD after their encounters. Good luck explaining that to a therapist. Many have reported experiencing recurring nightmares about the dogman they saw after their encounters. Some people that believe these creatures aren't just normal animals and are truly supernatural in some way think this is evidence of them having some sort of otherworldly, mystical qualities. Personally, I think this can just be chalked up to the aforementioned PTSD symptoms rather than the dogmen being some type of humanoid canine Freddy Krueger. There are some YouTubers, myself included, that collect and narrate these encounters, or interview people about what they claim to have seen. I do think encounters that come secondhand from content creators should be held to a higher degree of scrutiny than ones that are just shared by the eyewitness with no financial incentive for reasons that should be pretty apparent. And I do include myself when I say that these people should be held to a greater degree of scrutiny. There are many Dogman encounters I've heard about and eyewitnesses that have been interviewed on YouTube channels that I fully believe are genuine. There are also many that I think aren't. The problem is that anyone who builds their internet presence, and often financial livelihood, around their propensity to either encounter Dogman themselves or their ability to find Dogman stories to either share or interview witnesses about, well, that well can run dry pretty quickly and often sooner rather than later. This can lead to content creators either fabricating encounters or interviewing people that they're aware are likely being less than forthright, to say the very least. There are some aspects that appear in many Dogman encounters that only started cropping up after these creatures became a more popular topic for YouTube videos, and I can't say that instills me with confidence in regard to certain traits Dogman is said to possess being legitimate, but more on that later. If you start really looking into all the Dogman encounters that get reported, you will begin to notice some patterns emerge about how eyewitnesses describe what they encountered. Certain physical descriptions appear in some stories, but not others. Going off of these physical descriptions, it's said that there are 7 types of these dogmen. The 7 types fall into 2 groups. The first group, which are referred to as Type 3s, very confusing, I know, and the second group, whose members are referred to as K9s. The first group, the Type 3s, are described as closer to primates with snouts like baboons, chimps, mandrills, etc., than the Hollywood wolfman people often picture Dogman as being. They have legs that are plantigrade rather than digitigrade, meaning their legs are structured like a human's and not a canine's. There are 3 different variations of these Type 3s. The first of these Type 3s are described as tall, compared to humans at least. They're lean and strong, and they have heads that resemble those of baboons. The second variant is said to be similar, but they have heads more like a chow chow dog rather than a baboon. They're also much larger than pretty much every human male that doesn't have a career playing in the NBA or the NFL. The third variant of the Type 3s are what's known as gogwees. These things are said to basically be like a Bigfoot with a snout, more like a baboon than the typical gorilla-like creature Sasquatch is portrayed as in pop culture. They're gigantic, over 8 feet tall, extremely muscular, 5 feet across is a phrase that pops up in a lot of eyewitness reports. They are believed to be carnivores and have the fangs that would be necessary to eat an all-meat diet. There are even some reports of them wearing pelts made from various animals, bears included. These gogwees also have long, sharp claws, which you won't find on any known apes. If the reports are to be believed, gogwees reside in very cold, very remote areas in Canada and states like Alaska, Wyoming, North Dakota, etc., and they're definitely not something you want to run into. In zoology, Bergman's rule states that members of similar species that live in colder environments will be larger than those living in warmer ones, which could potentially explain the enormous size of the gogwee. These gogwees are actually where the Type 3 name comes from. There are said to be 4 types of Sasquatches out there, and the gogwees are believed to be the 3rd type. The gogwee kind of pulls double duty in the world of cryptozoology, being classified as both a type of Bigfoot and a type of Dogman, depending on who you ask. What's interesting is that despite having bodies more similar to that of a primate, and heads like one in the case of the 1st and the 3rd variant, all 3 variants of the Type 3 are reported to have pointy canine ears. These seem to be a universal trait for dogmen. They've been nicknamed Batman ears due to their visual similarity to the pointy tips on the Dark Knight's cowl. A few eyewitnesses have stated that they actually saw the beast's ears sticking out behind something before they came face to face with the dogman responsible for their encounter. These claws and ears that these Type 3s possess that aren't shared by any known apes is what has caused them to be classified as a variety of dogman. The second group of dogmen is said to be comprised of creatures that more closely match what you would see in a werewolf movie, and they're referred to as canines, either spelled like the word or spelled phonetically like when referring to police dogs. The first variant of this group is described as resembling an upright walking timber wolf, but much larger, and their bipedal locomotion isn't ungainly or awkward like that of an actual wolf walking upright. Rather, it's said to be very smooth and natural looking. The second variation of these canines are said to look like hyenas. What's interesting about this description is that, contrary to popular belief, hyenas are not actually canines. They belong to the family Hyenidae rather than Canidae, and are actually closer to cats than dogs, genetically speaking. This raises the question if these creatures resemble a non-canine creature and don't seem to share the primate attributes of the Type 3s. Well, what the heck are they? The next 2 variants are the closest to what people picture when they picture a werewolf. Many eyewitnesses have actually said that specific films, Van Helsing and Dog Soldiers in particular, show pretty much an exact match for what they saw. The 3rd variant of the canine type is described as a stereotypical werewolf, a cross between a human and a wolf with digitigrade legs, a canine head, a human torso, hands instead of paws but paws instead of feet, and plenty of fur covering its body. These things are also said to have physiques that would be the envy of just about any bodybuilder, with well-defined muscles, visible abdominals, thick arms and legs, broad shoulders, and large, very muscular backs. Many eyewitnesses have also made mention of how the creature that they saw seemed to have what's known as a V-taper, the classical bodybuilder physique with a wide back and broad shoulders, but a very small waist, making the torso look kind of like an upside-down triangle. While Sasquatches are also described as being very muscular, their physiques are said to be much more blocky and square-like than the Dogmans. The 4th and final variant is described as similar to the previous variant, but beefed up by a good amount, kind of like a big brother. They've been nicknamed soldier types due to them being built like the perfect fighting machines. The other notable physical attribute that they're reported to possess are gigantic heads, disproportionate to their even already gigantic bodies. This feature has caused some people to nickname members of this variant fatheads, although I doubt anyone's calling them that to their face. Canine variants are also reported to often, although not always, have tails like a dog or wolf. No word on whether or not they wag them when excited. Although there are encounters out there from people that were unfortunate enough to see duos, trios, and even whole packs of dogmen, to my knowledge there are no known reports of people reporting a sighting that involved multiple different types. This could be chalked up to something like these creatures living in different geographical areas that they're better suited to survive in, or the variants just being too dissimilar in ways that aren't apparent to us for the different types of dogmen to really get along. Some people also see it as evidence that we're actually talking about a few different animals here, that the werewolf type, the primate type, and the hyena type are all 3 different species, rather than just variants of the same species. Eyewitness testimony is all well and good, but I'm sure that some of you are asking, If so many people have seen these creatures, well, where are the pictures? In terms of potential photographic and video evidence of Dogman, it does exist, but as of the time of this recording, there is nothing that can be called 100% conclusive. If you're on the fence about these creatures existing, I could see these pushing you over towards believing, but if you're a diehard skeptic, I understand if none of this causes you to undergo a change of heart. That said, while there's nothing quite on the same level as the Patty film or even the Forman footage like there is for Bigfoot, I do think that there are a handful of photos and videos that likely show a living, breathing Dogman. Now, pictures and videos being a bit blurry is nothing new in the world of cryptozoology, but again, it does mean that they might not persuade those that are more skeptical towards the existence of these creatures. I think less than crystal clear video and photo quality is understandable, all things considered. Being face to face with a 7-foot-tall, 400-pound apex predator that resembles a horror movie monster isn't what anyone would call the ideal situation to be taking a photograph or video in. Now, this isn't to say there aren't hoaxes. There are more than a few photos and videos floating around that are either intentional hoaxes with a guy in a suit, Photoshop jobs, misidentifications, or movie stills that have somehow been mistaken for actual proof of Dogman's existence. The most famous Dogman pictures that might genuinely show an undiscovered bipedal canine are, in my opinion, the Beast of Seven Shoots photo, the Anway Photo, and the California Redwood Photo. The Beast of Seven Shoots photo was taken on June 1st, 2005, in a park named Parc des Sept Chutes in Quebec, Canada, which is what gave the creature its name. Now, what's really interesting about the Beast of Seven Shoots picture is that what I'm showing you now is actually a zoomed-in version. Here's the original photograph that was taken that day. Do you see the creature? Well, if you don't, neither did the photographer when he first snapped the pic. It wasn't until he got home that he noticed this strange figure in the bottom right-hand corner of the photo. Now, there's one detail that makes this photo very interesting, even for a potential Dogman picture. If you look at what the creature's arm bends, you can see that it seems to be holding some type of white object. According to the photographer, a small white dog had been reported missing in the area that day. My apologies to any pet lovers watching. Now, just eyeballing our potential mystery monster here, he seems to more closely resemble a Type 3 Dogman, some sort of bipedal primate with a snout, rather than the truly werewolf-esque canines. Given the backstory here and the fact that our potential Dogman is tucked away in the corner of the image and is not the central focus, I can't imagine that the photograph is a hoax and think it's much more likely that the two possibilities for what we're looking at are either a genuine Dogman or some type of optical illusion, possibly trees and a weird trick of the light. Now, as a true believer, when evaluating any potential pieces of evidence for these creatures, I have to keep in mind that my brain can sometimes make me see what I want to see. I have to try and be as critical as possible in assessing photographs and videos to make sure I don't jump the gun and let my optimism get the best of me. With all of that acknowledged, the anonymous photographer did say he revisited the area to try and retake the photo, but noticed that whatever's in the bottom right-hand corner wasn't there when he returned, which leads me to believe that the Beast of Seven Shoots picture shows a genuine Type 3 Dogman, most likely a googly. There are a few details that really jump out to me as evidence of its legitimacy. The first is what seems to be the sagittal crest that the figure in the picture has. A sagittal crest is a ridge of bone that runs along the midline of the top of the skull of certain animals, and a visual indicator of those animals possessing very strong jaw muscles, as you can imagine the Beast of Seven Shoots would have if it really is a carnivorous googly. Multiple primates have sagittal crests, including snouted primates such as orangutans and chimpanzees. The reason I make such a point of this is because the sagittal crest would be a very unusual detail for a hoaxer to include, and if the figure is just some optical illusion, it would have to be the mother of all coincidences for a bunch of trees to resemble the shape of not only a giant snouted primate, but one that appears to be very anatomically accurate. Another detail that pops out to me is the shape of the creature's head. It has the sort of conical-shaped head, or bullet-shaped head as some people call it, that many Bigfoot eyewitnesses have reported. This is another detail that is reported, but doesn't show up very often in hoaxes. Now, just because something perfectly resembles a cryptid doesn't completely rule out the possibility of a fake. This picture is called the Shadowlands photo or the Wild Creek photo, and many Bigfoot eyewitnesses have said that it looks exactly like what they encountered, specifically pointing out the creature's lack of a neck, which is a feature commonly reported by people that have seen Bigfoot. Despite the strong resemblance to an actual Bigfoot, this photo is a complete sham. It's actually a statue that's less than a foot tall and is placed near duckweed, the green flecks in the water, which shows us that it has to be very tiny. While that photo may be a fake, I don't think that the Beast of Seven Shoots is a similar situation. There are two main reasons for this. The first, as mentioned earlier, is how the figure is tucked away in the bottom corner of the image rather than being the focus of the picture. The second is the fact that the picture was taken in 2005. Back in 2005, no one other than the most hardcore of cryptozoology enthusiasts was talking about Dogman, and even then it was still a very niche topic compared to Bigfoot, an already niche topic, and outside of people that had personally had encounters, you just weren't really seeing that much discussion about it, if any. Some people argue that Gogwees should really be classified as a type of Bigfoot, and not Dogman, so maybe this could have been an attempt at a Bigfoot hoax and it's retroactively being classified as a Dogman. But in pop culture, Sasquatches are pretty much universally portrayed as either the patty type, that are more like a giant bipedal gorilla, or something more Neanderthal-like. Never something with a pronounced baboon-like snout. A large snout would be a very strange and unnecessary detail for a hoaxer to include for no real benefit. Given all these details, I have a very difficult time believing that what we're seeing is just some tree branches and a stump that resembles a humanoid figure with a snout. To me, that really only leaves one possibility, and I don't think it's going to make anyone want to go to Parc des Chutes anytime soon. Next up is this photo, which was taken in 2004 in Anway, Michigan, and for that reason has been named the Anway Photo. The exact backstory for this picture is debated, but there are two largely similar versions of events that people stand behind. The first is that the photo was taken by a boy in the backseat of a car that was backing up. He saw the creature in the backlights of the vehicle and quickly moved to take a picture. The other version of the story states that this picture was taken while the vehicle was at a rest stop. As of this recording, no one has come forward and identified himself as the photographer, so it is currently unknown which version is the true account, assuming that either one is an accurate description of the events that led to the photo's creation. Now in the photo itself, you can clearly see what looks like some type of bipedal stance, and the yellow eyes that many eyewitnesses have reported seeing. A lot of people said that the head looks more feline than it does canine, and that is what I thought initially, but if you look closer, you can very clearly see the protruding snout that a Dogman has. There's a wolf picture floating around online that people have said the Anway photo is just a Photoshop job of, but honestly I don't think the wolf picture proves anything other than the fact that a giant canine will in fact look like a canine. One problem I do have with this photo is that despite the claim that it was taken in 2004, I haven't been able to find any discussions about it online from before 2016. This, combined with the two backstories that are being passed around and the anonymity of the photographer, does raise some questions about the authenticity of the picture and if it was really taken when it was said to have been taken. Finally, we have the California Redwoods photo, which was taken on May 7th in 2017, sometime around 5 p.m. in Jedediah Smith Redwoods State Park in Northern California. The photographer has chosen to stay anonymous, but described the creature as standing somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 feet tall, weighing anywhere from 250 to 400 pounds. Bit of a range, but I imagine that estimating Dogman weights is more of an art than a science, and possessing the V-taper, bodybuilder-esque physique that is commonly reported in Dogman Encounters. They also said that whatever shown here is definitely not a bear. The photographer in question claimed the figure looked directly at them, which very understandably prompted them to decide it was time to leave the park completely. The picture's metadata has been analyzed, and it's been determined that no Photoshop was used in its creation, and I really can't see any way for this to be an optical illusion of some sort, meaning that whatever we're looking at here is either a guy in a suit, a misidentification of some sort, or a genuine Dogman. Skeptics have been quick to argue that whatever we're seeing here is just a bear standing on its hind legs, but I have some problems with this theory. The first is that the creature seems to have the pointy Batman ears that a Dogman will have, but a bear will not. The snout seems more wolf-like than bear-like to me, given how far it sticks out, which is another piece of evidence that suggests what we're looking at isn't just a bear who decided to stand up on its hind legs. Like the photographer said, it also seems to have a body more similar to the classical bodybuilder physique of a Dogman, rather than the bulky one that a bear on its hind legs would. There are some other potential Dogman photos that I would classify as intriguing, if not necessarily convincing. Above the clear fakes, but below the ones I just discussed. The biggest problem that many of these pictures have for me is the lack of any backstory attached to them. While I don't expect people to attach their names and faces to their stories about encounters with real-life werewolves, some type of background on the encounter itself does help to establish credibility. In the absence of any backstory or information beyond there sometimes being whispers about when and where the pictures were taken, they are relegated to being interesting photos that will make people more open to the existence of Dogman wonder, but probably not believe. There are also people out there that claim they have incredible evidence of Dogman that they either can't or won't share for whatever reason. I've heard claims of there being videos of Dogman that put the Patty film to shame, and would immediately end all arguments about whether or not these creatures exist. When it comes to potential Dogman evidence, for me it's a case of put up or shut up. Dogman researchers are already fighting an incredibly uphill battle when it comes to people even entertaining the idea that these things really exist. When you have other people claiming that they have this incredible evidence that can never see the light of day, it's really not helping the credibility of the subject in the eyes of the public. Anyone claiming to have the Dogman equivalent of a girlfriend that lives in Canada should not be taken at their word, and I can't help but feel that it dings their credibility as a whole when they speak on the topic. Potential video evidence of these creatures exists, but as mentioned earlier, as of this recording, nothing has come out that will definitively end the debate on whether or not Dogman is really out there. The pieces of footage that I personally find the most intriguing are this video of a creature in a tree of unknown origin, this footage that was captured in Texas in 2018, and this video from a Facebook livestream in 2020. Going in order of appearance, I'll start by talking about the video of the creature in the tree. The footage shows what looks like a gray Dogman with the kind of chow-like head that people say belongs to the second variant of the Type 3s. The footage is pretty interesting, but I can't say that there's anything in it that completely rules out the possibility of this just being a guy in a suit or some other type of smoke and mirrors. Next up is this 2018 Texas Dogman footage. Now, over the years, a lot of people have told me that it can be very difficult to actually make out what's in the video at first, so I'll try and help you out if you can. These two branches form sort of an upside-down V-shape. Our potential Dogman is situated between them. If you still can't see the entity, try looking directly above this red line. Hopefully now you can see one yellow eye and a little bit of another eye, and even more interestingly, you can see those eyes blink. You can also see the snout on the creature and a little bit of the figure's body, but it's mostly obscured by the trees. I've never really seen this piece of potential Dogman footage being discussed, but I definitely find it to be one of those fascinating pieces of potential evidence for the existence of these creatures. The thing that really jumps out to me about the footage is the blink that our potential Dogman seems to do. This thing is a guy in a costume, well, they really went to a lot of trouble for a hoax that very few people have seen. There are videos of some really impressive custom-made werewolf masks out there that are able to blink. Those masks don't look at all like what's in this video, and they might not have even existed in 2018. And once again, this would really be a lot of effort for effectively no reward, since the original video's poster hasn't really sought to get too much mainstream attention for what is, in my opinion, some very, very impressive footage. The final potential Dogman video I wanted to discuss is the 2020 Facebook Live footage. The reason that this footage is so fascinating is because it comes from a Facebook live stream, meaning that there's no way for it to be the product of some fancy special effects tricks. Just looking at the figure, I don't think it could really be a man in a suit or something like that. This video is honestly the only piece of potential Dogman footage where I can't find any alternate explanations for what it could be, if not the genuine article. The only answers I've seen offered by skeptics are that the figure is either an ostrich or smoke from the cigarette of the person streaming the footage, and I can't say that either one of those possibilities seem to really match up with what we see in the video. Definitely doesn't look 100% like a conventional Dogman. The figure is pretty darn skinny and is moving on all fours. At the same time, there are many reports of Dogmen moving quadrupedally, so that answers that question, and there are also reports of Dogmen looking unusually skinny and even sickly in some cases. Eyewitnesses also tend to say that these very skinny Dogmen have less dense fur, which has led some Dogman researchers to believe that these are just specimens with some mange or some other type of physical affliction, rather than another creature entirely. After all, if Dogman is just another natural animal, it stands to reason that they'd be just as susceptible to disease as any other animal. The footage comes from Florida, which is no stranger to Dogman sightings, and the gentleman that filmed the creature actually had sightings on his property prior to this one, to the point of capturing this potential photograph of a Dogman prior to the filming of the Facebook livestream. The photo itself isn't conclusive, but it does lend more credence to the possibility of this video really showing a Dogman. The existence of things like Photoshop has already been a problem for a while when it comes to evaluating alleged photos of Dogman or other cryptids, but the recent rise of generative image AIs is becoming a problem that will likely only worsen in the coming years in regard to the gathering and evaluation of potential Dogman evidence. While Photoshop was already bad enough when it came to muddying the waters around what Dogman evidence could be the real deal, anyone with an internet connection being able to create a photorealistic image or even video of whatever they can imagine is going to be exponentially worse for the subject. Now, there are programs that can detect AI-generated content, but this raises the question of, will we soon bear witness to an arms race between deceptive AI generators and AI detectors trying to outdo each other? If the generative AIs are able to become indistinguishable from genuine photos and videos, well, that's going to be really bad for Dogman research. Also for politics, if anyone can create a fake video of any elected official or candidate saying anything they can imagine, our judicial system and society as a whole. But I want to focus on the stuff that's actually important here. Dogman, and our ability to verify Dogman evidence. In addition to the potential videos and photos of Dogman, howls that are said to originate from our canine cryptids serve as another piece of potential evidence. There are a few recordings out there that are said to be of Dogman vocalizations. Let me play one for you right now. Now, that audio definitely doesn't sound like any known animal that I'm familiar with, but that doesn't rule out it being human-made with some fancy editing tricks. Potential Dogman howls and vocalizations are interesting, often pretty scary sounding, but ultimately something that isn't going to move the needle very much when it comes to convincing skeptics that these creatures really exist. Still, given the number of Dogman eyewitnesses that have reported hearing these nightmarish howls, and have even said that these alleged audio recordings match what they heard, I would be remiss to not mention these pieces of audio in a video titled Dogman 101. In terms of more directly physical evidence, potential Dogman tracks are held up as an argument for these creatures really being out there. There are sets of very clearly canine tracks that suggest whoever left them possesses a very long bipedal stride. While Dogman tracks haven't received the same level of rigorous scientific investigation that potential Bigfoot tracks have, there are many photos of indentations that very clearly look like canine tracks, but don't match any known canines, size-wise to say the very least. Like the potential howls, I think potential Dogman tracks are another argument for Dogman's existence, if not necessarily a silver bullet. No pun intended. While there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of reports of Dogmen over the past few decades, the story goes that the first reported sighting of one of these creatures came out of Wexford County, Michigan, in the year 1887. The story goes that two lumberjacks were working when they ran into a 7-foot-tall creature with a man's body, a wolf's head, eyes that were either blue or amber, depending on who you ask. The creature let out a howl that sounded like a human scream. The story has become a part of the canon of Dogman sightings, but I've yet to find any primary sources for where the claim originates from. More on that soon. Even if the story did occur as described, it was likely not the first time that man and Dogman crossed paths. Native American tribes have tales of their own encounters with creatures that seem to be bipedal, half-canine, half-man hybrids. Things like the Choctaw people's stories of the Nulusa, a tall and gangly creature that was described as being blacker than the night, with a snout and pointed ears. The stories of skinwalkers that come from the Four Corner states, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado, are also brought up as potential candidates for dogmen that were here before the European settlers were. But to me, they really seem to be a different thing entirely. The stories say that skinwalkers are evil Navajo shamans who gained the ability to shapeshift into various animals by committing a grievous crime, usually murder against a blood relative. It's said that when these skinwalkers shapeshift into these animal forms, they look off in some way. They'll have things like backward-facing legs, they'll be missing tails even if the animal they're trying to appear as should have one, they'll have human eyes, etc. Now, the reason that some people think dogmen and skinwalkers might be related in some manner is the way that skinwalkers are said to walk upright when in the form of, say, a wolf or a dog or a coyote or what have you. Now, these stories of Navajo shapeshifters sound pretty unbelievable, but it's said that to many of the Navajo people, even in 2024, these stories are very real. It's also said that the Navajo really don't like to talk about skinwalkers, especially to outsiders. With all that said, even if these stories are true, I'm not sure I necessarily see a link between them and Dogman. Skinwalkers are said to be shapeshifters. I think Dogman is just a regular flesh and blood animal. Now, if skinwalkers are real, and they can turn into dogmen, well then we've really got a problem on our hands. One event that helped to significantly raise the profile of Dogman was the release of a radio song in 1987 entitled The Legend. The song was recorded by a Michigan disc jockey named Steve Cook and was about an upright walking creature with a canine head and humanoid body that appeared once a decade, always during years that ended in 7. The song does mention an 1887 Dogman sighting by a group of lumberjacks in Wexford County, which I think could be the true origin of the aforementioned first recorded Dogman sighting. There are some differences. The song mentions the group of lumberjacks numbering 11 rather than 2, and there's no mention of the creature they encountered having either blue or amber eyes or being 7 feet tall, although a later verse does mention that one of these creatures would have measured 7'4" when it was standing on 2 legs. Now what makes this song so interesting is that Cook wasn't actually familiar with the Dogman at all when he wrote the song. He was unfamiliar with the sightings of a giant bipedal humanoid canine cryptid in Michigan, and made it up purely from his own imagination. Despite this, after playing the song, Cook became inundated with reports of people claiming to have seen the creature, as well as requests to play the song on his radio station, of course. His song seems to be where the word Dogman first originated from, as well as the creature being more heavily associated with the state of Michigan. Although these creatures have had many sightings all over the USA, many people still refer to the beast as just the Michigan Dogman rather than Dogman, or even the American Dogman. As far as Cook's thoughts on Dogman, in his own words, I'm tremendously skeptical, because I've sort of seen the way folklore becomes built from the creation of this song to what it's turned into. But I do believe people who think they saw something really did see something. I also think the Dogman provides them with an avenue to explain what they couldn't explain for themselves. The song quickly became the most requested one at his radio station, and he even re-recorded it 10 years later, mentioning a 1987 Dogman sighting in the state of Michigan. If sightings of bipedal canines only began after the song was played on the radio station, even I would be pretty quick to write them off as coming from either liars that heard the song, or people misidentifying animals after hearing the song. But even if the word Dogman wasn't necessarily being used, there are actually many reports of creatures that line up with eyewitnesses' descriptions of Dogman and also predate Cook's song. Cook accidentally creating a song about a creature he dreamed up that turns out to match the description of a cryptid that has had sightings reported in America for decades at that point might seem like an incredible, and to many skeptics, unbelievable coincidence, but it might not be as improbable as it seems at first glance. It's no secret that stories of werewolves go back centuries. Although I personally love the song, and I think that Steve Cook lived up to his surname when he wrote the composition's lyrics, the idea of a tall and frightening canine creature that walks on 2 legs doesn't win you a whole lot of points for creativity. Besides, even if he had dreamt up his idea of a bipedal canine all on his own, before learning that what he described matched an actual cryptid that people have reported seeing, it wouldn't be the strangest coincidence. In addition to sightings from Native Americans that actually predate the song, there are also many dogmen that are said to inhabit certain specific regions exclusively, with well-documented histories of sightings from the 20th century that still predate the song. I will now be covering these sightings. Elkhorn, Wisconsin is said to be home to the world's most famous dogman, the Beast of Bray Road. The Beast story began in 1936 when a fellow named Mark Shackleman is said to have encountered the creature while it was atop a Native American burial ground. I'd be more skeptical of the story if it didn't predate the horror movie cliché. Shackleman was working as a night watchman for a local Catholic school when he saw the creature clawing at the mound he was on top of. Upon noticing Shackleman, the beast fled into the night. The next morning, he saw the claw marks in the dirt, confirming that what he saw actually happened. It wasn't just his imagination. He returned that night, don't ask me why, with nothing other than a flashlight, again, don't ask me why, and once again, he came across the Wisconsin werewolf. This time, the figure stood up and actually faced Shackleman directly. He said that what he saw was over 6 feet tall standing up, had dark hair all over its body, and possessed the foulest of stenches. The strangest part of this story is that Shackleman claimed the creature actually spoke to him, saying something that sounded like Gadara before slowly exiting the scene. Now, there are countless videos online of dogs barking and howling in a way where it sounds like they're speaking, and it is very possible that this was the case here, rather than these creatures having some sort of spoken language, and that the rush of fear and adrenaline that Shackleman was no doubt experiencing caused him to perceive the sound as the dogman trying to communicate with him. The photo you've been looking at on screen is a drawing by Mark's son Joe Shackleman, based off of the descriptions his father gave him of what he saw those 2 nights. Mark Shackleman wouldn't by any means be the last person to report an encounter with the Beast of Bray Road, with sightings coming out in the 70s and then exploding in the 80s and 90s, which brought the creature national attention in the world of cryptozoology. A notable 1989 sighting comes from a woman going under the name Lori that was driving home at around 1 in the morning, traveling down Bray Road, when she saw a figure on the side of the road. The creature was kneeling down, but Lori estimated that it was about 5'7" and 150 pounds. It does sound like a bit of a lowball, but it being dark and the figure being in a crouched position may have affected how well she could actually see the beast. She said that it seemed to be eating roadkill and didn't really react to her beyond watching her vehicle as she drove away. The next major sighting of the Beast of Bray Road came on Halloween night in 1991, when a woman named Doris pulled to the side of the road after apparently hitting an animal with her car. She wasn't sure at first if she'd actually hit something, but as soon as Doris exited the vehicle, she saw the beast charging at her. She quickly got back into her car and got out of there, likely treating speed limit laws as vague suggestions given the circumstances, all the way home. After getting home, she noticed scratches on the back of her vehicle, seemingly left by the claws of the beast. The potential claw marks were investigated by Linda Godfrey, the first person to really investigate the Beast of Bray Road, and the Dogman phenomenon as a whole. Godfrey confirmed that the scratches on the vehicle really did exist, but it wasn't fully clear what their origin was. Sightings of the beast would continue through the 90s, before largely going quiet until 2020, when a man by the name of Ron Rice reported the most recent encounter that someone has had with the beast. Unfortunately, the only alleged photo of the Beast of Bray Road is this picture. That went viral a few years ago, and I think we can pretty safely say it's a taxidermy, and not the Dogman of the Dairyland. The significance of the Beast of Bray Road to the field of Dogman research comes from the fact that many reported encounters with the creature predate Cook's 1987 Dogman song. While many skeptics are quick to write off stories of Dogman Encounters as complete works of fiction that were inspired by the song, the existence of Dogman Stories that came before the song's release does add more legitimacy to the possibility of these creatures really existing. Land between the lakes, Kentucky, is a national recreational area that is also said to be home to a dogman with sightings that predate Cook's song. The creature, appropriately nicknamed the Beast of LBL, is said to likely be some sort of Type 3 dogman, a primate-like creature, and had its first reported sighting in 1973 when a group of college students from Murray State University were camping in the area. One of them reported feeling that he was being watched and hearing something in the woods, but his friends wrote this off as him being overly paranoid. Once the sun went down, the group reported hearing something circling the campsite that they were staying at. This may be when they started to wonder if there was some validity to their friends' suspicions. But the howls that started soon after, I think that definitely sealed it for them. These howls were like a wolf's, but no wolf on Earth is big enough to emit the noises that the campers were hearing. The howling kept getting louder and louder, and seemed to be coming from all directions. By the time the undergrads saw a pair of glowing red eyes, they decided it was time to head back to campus. The story goes that as they piled into their microbus, they felt something holding their vehicle back. They eventually broke free. When they returned to campus, they found claw marks on the back of the van. There have been sightings of the creature since, but the Beast of LBL's real claim to fame comes from an incident said to have, I put an emphasis on the phrase said to have, occurred in 1987. The story goes that a family's camper was found covered in blood, and the bodies of the now deceased family were strewn about. It's claimed that this incident was covered up by local authorities in order to protect the tourism industry in the area. This is quite the claim, and while the alleged LBL massacre is one of the most famous Dogman stories out there, whether or not the incident actually occurred is debated within Dogman circles. I'm personally of the opinion that it probably didn't. There are no specific people that anyone has ever claimed were the victims of the attack, meaning that there are no grave sites or newspaper reports that people claim either belong to or are about the victims of the massacre. My other major issue with the story is that the aftermath doesn't sound anything like what we've heard about Dogman attacks. Now, our knowledge of Dogman attacks is limited to either what people have seen them do to animals, or the number of human deaths that have been chalked up to certain animals that are theorized to have really been the work of a dogman. More on that later. Either way, leaving huge bloody messes doesn't sound like Dogman's modus operandi whatsoever. Despite their enormous size, it said that these creatures move extremely quickly and pretty much silently, and then end the hunt before their prey can even begin to struggle against them. If a Dogman left behind some horror movie-style bloodbath every time it wanted dinner or just had a bad day, well, these things really wouldn't be able to stay hidden for too long. That's just my 2 cents. What is interesting is that in the area the attack is said to have taken place, it's said that locals are actually split as to whether or not there's any truth to the story of the beast's bloody rampage. There's also this photo, which is said to show the beast. I can at least see what people are saying is supposed to be the creature, but I can't say that this photo is really a holy grail of potential Dogman evidence. One way or another, plenty of people that live in and have visited the area still report being unable to shake the feeling that they're being watched while in land between the lakes, hearing strange howls at night, and seeing glowing red eyes peering at them from deep in the darkness. The Dwayyo is said to be a very large, bipedal wolf-like creature that lives in the state of Maryland. The report that gave the creature its name came in 1944 when it was first sighted in Frederick County. Along with the sightings, the creature is said to emit howls and leave behind tracks according to locals. Why the monster is called the Dwayyo, no one seems to know actually. There's some speculation that the name comes from either the Native Americans that originally lived in what is now Maryland, or the Dutch settlers that came later, but there just doesn't seem to be a definitive answer one way or the other. Sightings would continue over the next couple of decades, but it wasn't until 1965 when the creature known as the Dwayyo would start to gain a greater level of mainstream recognition. On November 27th, the Frederick News Post published an encounter from a man by the name of John Brecker. The account reads as follows. Near the woods of Gambrel State Park, John Brecker went out in his yard to investigate a strange noise. It was getting dark, and he had started back to the house when he saw something moving toward him. It was as big as a bear, had long black hair and a bushy tail, and growled like a wolf or a dog in anger. As it got closer, it stood up on its hind legs and attacked him. Brecker fought the creature until it ran into the woods, leaving him, his wife, and his children in horror. Deciding to remain anonymous under the alias John Brecker, he filed a report with local state police, telling of an attack by a mysterious monster that he called a Dwayyo. Once the story hit the news, more headlines about Dwayyo sightings soon followed, but it is very possible that these reports came from people looking to pull a prank, rather than there suddenly being a spike in encounters following Brecker's. Then the next month, all the reports stopped, just as suddenly as they had began. Over half a year later, in the summer of 1966, the next sighting of the Dwayyo occurred. A man that reported his encounter under the name Jim A. said he was approached by the creature while camping. Jim claimed that the animal was deer-sized and covered in dark brown hair. The encounter didn't end up being an especially long one, as the creature saw Jim, screamed, and left. Mr. A must have really spooked him. The Dwayyo must have been so spooked, in fact, that he went in hiding for over 10 years, with the next major sighting not happening until fall of 1976. 2 men were driving off of Route 77 when they saw the creature dart across the road in front of them. They said that what they saw was moving bipedally in a very smooth way that a wolf or a dog just can't. The figure stood at least 6 feet tall by their estimations, and had a very developed and muscular physique covered in brown fur with a canine head. There was another Dwayyo sighting 2 years later, but they seem to have gone quiet since. Or, to perhaps phrase it a little better, people haven't been referring to what they saw as a Dwayyo. Interestingly, the Dwayyo is believed by some to be the enemy of another Maryland cryptid, a giant half-reptile, half-bird creature known as the snallygaster, although no one seems to know why the two can't just get along. Stories of the flying snallygaster may seem unbelievable, but in the early 1900s, snallygaster fever reached such a pitch that the Smithsonian offered a reward for its capture, and it's rumored that then-President Teddy Roosevelt wanted to actually go and hunt the beast himself, although these rumors are disputed. The key difference between the Dwayyo and the snallygaster is that snallygaster sightings stopped a long time ago. Dogman sightings in the state of Maryland definitely haven't. Now, there are a couple of elephants in the room that I've alluded to but still need to formally address. The first is that if you tell someone about a 7-foot-tall bipedal creature with a wolf's head and a humanoid body, 99 out of 100 people are going to say werewolf before they say Dogman. And that might be a drastic overestimation of how famous Dogman is on my part. In fact, pretty much every single eyewitness whose knowledge of these creatures started with a face-to-face encounter has said that they thought what they were looking at was somehow a genuine werewolf. Werewolves are creatures said to be men that shapeshift into a wolf form. Whether this form is just a wolf or something closer to a human-wolf hybrid like Dogman, well, that depends on the version of the story, and that they shift whenever there's a full moon. They're said to be vulnerable to wolfsbane and silver, and are often compelled to transform as a result of a curse. In addition to all these things, they are also, to my knowledge, fictional. Dogman, on the other hand, is believed to not be a human shapeshifter, but rather a natural animal that is always a 7-foot-tall canine with a humanoid body, and actually does exist out there somewhere. Many skeptics have written off the Dogman as being the product of people watching werewolf movies and then engaging in creative writing exercises, and funnily enough, there are Dogman believers out there that think the myth of werewolves comes from people sighting these creatures hundreds of years ago. Stories of shapeshifting werewolves are definitely part of the reason that Dogman as a topic has struggled to be taken seriously by the mainstream. Now, at the same time, even if you think stories about Dogman are a bunch of lies, you have to wonder why you don't hear too many people claiming to have seen Dracula, the Mummy, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, Phantom of the Opera, or Frankenstein. And before I get any comments about it, the monster considers himself to be Victor Frankenstein's son. I do think it's okay to refer to him as just Frankenstein and not Frankenstein's monster. In addition to all of those, I've definitely never heard of anyone claiming that they've seen the Invisible Man. So this of course raises the question, why is it only the Wolfman that gets reported sightings in the 21st century? I think that even the most ardent skeptics will have to admit that at a minimum, while there are of course people peddling stories they know are fabricated, some of these Dogman eyewitnesses, well at the very least, they believe that they saw the creature in question. Now these skeptics will write those encounters off as them misidentifying some known animal. A bear on 2 legs or one with mange is usually the go-to of anyone trying to discredit an eyewitness, or that what they saw was a hallucination caused by a mental condition or the abuse of illicit substances. As mentioned earlier, many of the encounters out there come from lifelong wilderness lovers, and very, very few people claim to have been under the influence of anything when they saw a Dogman. And not even those ardent and passionate true believers are going to be defending those eyewitnesses' testimonies. The second elephant in the room here that I think should be talked about is that when it comes to giant, hairy, bipedal cryptids that stalk the forests of North America, well, Dogman is at best the second most famous. Even if the first time you heard the word Dogman was when you clicked on this video, I'm willing to bet every cent to my name that you're familiar with the paranormal primate known as Bigfoot. The American ape man is just a much more mainstream cryptid. There's no monster truck named Dogman, there's no Dogman in the Hendersons movie, and there's no Finding Dogman show. And I can't even begin to imagine how much you'd have to pay someone to actually try and run into one of these guys. As a consequence of this, in cryptozoology circles, any conversation about Dogman that goes on long enough will eventually see Bigfoot brought up, even though the reverse really isn't the case. It's very, very rare, but not completely unheard of, for someone to believe in Dogman but not Bigfoot. Some people even refer to Bigfoot as a gateway cryptid that people are interested in before they learn more about Dogman. This means that there's been a great deal of speculation as to whether or not the two cryptids are aware of each other, if they interact, and if they are aware of each other and they do interact, well, what do their interactions look like? Some people who believe in Bigfoot but not Dogman think that the Dogmen are just misidentified Sasquatches, saying that they're a Bigfoot variation that has snouts and the canine attributes that eyewitnesses report, claws, the digitigrade legs, the canine ears, etc., come from people's brains filling in the blanks, so to speak, when they think they've seen a real-life werewolf. These individuals will argue that all Dogmen are really just type 3s, bipedal primates with snouts, that the canine variants don't exist, and that Dogmen should really just be classified as a type of Bigfoot rather than their own thing. Some people have argued that the Dogmen are Sasquatches wearing some type of masks, but what they're for or how they would even acquire them is really anyone's guess. And I've even heard one person argue that Bigfoot sightings are actually just misidentified Dogmen, but maybe he was just being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Now, as far as the speculated relationship between Bigfoot and Dogman goes, most people claim it is adversarial and clashes are the usual outcome when the paranormal primate meets the living lycanthrope. Now, I believe in Bigfoot. Since I made this video, you can obviously tell that I believe in Dogman. When I hear a story about a meeting between the two, I tend to approach the tale with a lot of skepticism, Bigfoot sightings are very rare. Dogman sightings is rarer still. Seeing the two of them cross paths is, in all likelihood, not even a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. Unless these two creatures are connected in some way that isn't readily apparent to us, I can't imagine that they run into each other very often. As a rule of thumb, the more action-packed an alleged cryptid encounter is, the less likely it is to be true, and some of the showdowns I've heard people claim they've seen between these two timberland titans sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. Now, if they are aware of each other and they do cross paths, well, I can't imagine that they get together and sing Kumbaya. I imagine they try to avoid each other, but if worse comes to worse, sometimes one of them will have to walk out of the forest alone that night. As far as which of these 14 forest fighters would prevail in a confrontation, my money's on Bigfoot, but the last thing I would ever want is a front row seat, especially if the victor's all riled up afterwards. You also have to remember, it's said that in the streets there's no such thing as a one-on-one fight. The same may be true of the woods. There are many reports of Bigfoot families, and there are also many reports of dogmen running in packs. If a full-on war broke out between the two groups, it would definitely be a clash of the record books. But personally, I am of the opinion that these two creatures don't exactly run in the same circles. Bigfoot's biggest hotspot is the Pacific Northwest, while for Dogman the big hotspots are said to be the Deep South and parts of the Midwest, although they do both have a very high number of sightings in Texas. It is still unknown whether or not they have some sort of peace treaty. Some of the folks who think that these creatures are more supernatural in nature push a theory along those lines, or if the two species just slid into their own territories based off of what environments they're more likely to thrive in, and they don't cross paths very often due to the fact that there's no real benefit to a Bigfoot-Dogman showdown, which is personally what I believe to be the case. Another issue that I have with these stories of Bigfoot-Dogman conflicts is that there don't seem to really be any reports of them from before the internet was created. For certain individuals, the internet has turned cryptozoology into an arms race so you can produce the most over-the-top stories, regardless of whether or not there's any truth to them. There are many people who like to claim that Dogman and Bigfoot are locked in some sort of war, and that Sasquatches are the good guys and Dogmen are the bad guys. Personally, I think these are both flesh and blood creatures, and that just simply isn't how animals operate in real life. Now, I do think that certain areas are going to have higher proportions of Bigfoot or Dogman sightings than others. I think that there are some people that lead lives or work jobs that have them spend more time outdoors than the average person. I think some people are even, you could say, luckier or unluckier, for being honest, when it comes to seeing these creatures. With all that said, when you have people claiming that they see Bigfoot, Dogman, and other cryptids on a routine basis, and especially when they don't produce a single shred of evidence, I don't think skeptical is nearly strong enough a word for how I feel about their stories. And these people are where an overwhelming majority of Bigfoot versus Dogman stories come from. One interesting detail that strongly sticks out to me is that there's definitely a contrast in the way that Bigfoot eyewitnesses talk about the encounter, or encounters that they've had, versus the way that Dogman eyewitnesses talk about their experiences. Bigfoot eyewitnesses run the gamut in terms of how they describe what they saw. While there are obviously people that were terrified in the moment, and even when recounting their story later, there are also people that describe what they saw as majestic and seemingly non-aggressive towards them, even if the eyewitness didn't stick around to push their luck. There are some people that, when telling their stories, talk like someone that saw a wild bald eagle or some other type of rare but fairly mundane animal sighting. There are even a few eyewitnesses that describe the creature they encountered as helpful in some way, and after hearing their stories, I actually believe that they're telling the truth. When it comes to Dogman sightings, the spectrum runs from scared to terrified. There aren't any positive Dogman stories out there, or at least there aren't any credible ones. The level of terror that people report doesn't seem to match even with reports of known predators. It's a much deeper and more primal type of fear that it seems only the Dogman can invoke. Another word that pops up a lot when eyewitnesses are describing their encounters with Dogman is the word evil. People often assign a sort of nefarious intent to these entities that goes beyond just an animal trying to protect its territory, or even a predator that's looking for another meal. It seems the Dogmen are very intelligent animals, and that makes me wonder whether or not these creatures actually do have the capacity for more abstract things like evil. People have said that the Dogman they saw seemed to be aware of the fact that it was scaring them, and it was absolutely relishing that feeling. Well, I think anyone is going to think that a 7-foot-tall real-life werewolf is evil-looking, people have specifically reported these beasts as having eyes that just scream sinister intent. Dogman definitely seems to have more malevolent behaviors than Bigfoot does, on average at least. Like I said, there are Bigfoot reports out there that paint what the eyewitness saw as being peaceful and occasionally even helpful. There's not a single positive Dogman story out there that's not just blatantly made up. While there are no experts when it comes to researching these creatures, and anyone who claims to be one has delusions of grandeur, and I think that no one should speak definitively or authoritatively when talking about Dogman, I will say that anyone who says they've had a positive experience with one of these animals is a liar, and not a very good one at that. At the same time, stories that involve Dogman trying to attack the eyewitness or even bluff charging them, they don't make up even close to the majority of reports. Even if a Dogman acknowledges the presence of a human, they don't act overly aggressive towards them. Now this raises the question, why does pretty much every single credible Dogman eyewitness say that what they saw really seemed to be some type of malevolent entity, and not just a dangerous and scary, but still otherwise mundane apex predator? One of the strangest aspects of the Dogman phenomenon is the number of people that have reported that when they had their encounter, the creature seemed to actively be trying to scare them, not just physically harm them or even scare them off, but to instill fear in them on the most primal level. Behaviors they engage in for what seems to be the purpose of scaring humans include, but are not limited to, using their claws to tap on home windows, jiggling the handles to doors of cars and houses, pounding on the side of houses, flashing some pretty sinister-looking grins that show the giant canines of these giant canines to whomever is unfortunate enough to run across them, dragging their claws along trees or buildings, just to give a few examples. At the moment, no one seems to actually know why they do this. Like many other Dogman traits and behaviors that I've discussed in this video, there are a few theories regarding their reasons for trying to scare humans. It could be a way of driving humans away from their territory. It could be that these behaviors aren't done for the purpose of scaring us. They're done for another reason that we aren't realizing, and the behaviors just happen to frighten humans. It's not exactly hard for a Dogman to do. Some people that are in the camp that think these things are really supernatural or otherworldly believe that Dogman feeds off of fear in some way, similar to the belief some UFO researchers have that aliens feed off of negative human emotions. Personally, I think Dogmen are just jerks. There are animals that seem to have a sense of humor and will prank other animals. I think the Dogmen find it very funny to scare us, and well, they certainly seem to have a knack for it. While the majority of Dogman reports seem to be one-on-one encounters, there are also a number of stories of Dogmen running in packs, as if a single Dogman wasn't bad enough already. This makes sense. Dogman is said to emit some pretty nasty howls, and one of the main reasons that wolves howl is to communicate with other members of their pack. The existence of Dogman packs does raise some questions, though. Wolves in the wild will hunt in packs, but I struggle to think of any known animal a Dogman would really need any help to take down. Wolf packs also offer the benefit of allowing wolves to defend their territories from other wolves. Strength in numbers is a thing, and if Dogmen are as territorial towards each other as they seem to be towards humans, well, they definitely want someone watching their back. A few people claim that these Dogman packs have alphas, usually the biggest, baddest member of the gang. Now, the idea of wolf packs in the wild having alphas is actually a misconception. It comes from a 1970 book titled The Wolf, Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. Now, if you don't agree with me saying that the book was wrong, you can ask the author, David Meck, and he'll back me up. The idea of alpha wolves essentially came from him assuming that wolves in the wild act the same as wolves in captivity. Wolves in captivity actually will have alphas, betas, etc., but wolf packs in the wild are pretty much just wolf families. The alpha is usually just the father of the family. At the same time, Dogmen and wolves aren't one-to-one, and it's possible that given these creatures' level of intelligence, maybe they could have some type of hierarchical social structure with an alpha, similar to primates such as chimps, gorillas, baboons, etc. On the other hand, many of these stories of alpha Dogmen come off as a bit embroidered, to say the very least. For the people online that treat Dogman as a creative writing topic, they feel the need to make their stories even more scary or thrilling than the ones that predated them. Tales of an even bigger, meaner dogman that the other dogmen are afraid of is a quick and easy way to accomplish this goal if you don't concern yourself too heavily with telling the truth. At the same time, scientists currently believe that the reason that humans' intelligence became so much greater than other animals is due to the existence of our complex social groups. If dogmen also have packs with complex social structures, it could help to explain how they were able to develop the incredible levels of intelligence that eyewitnesses have reported them displaying. The various dogman reports out there definitely suggest that in addition to being incredibly physically capable, these entities are also incredibly intelligent for animals, maybe just a few steps behind humans. I think they could recognize themselves in a mirror, maybe they have a theory of mind. I don't think their SAT scores would really impress college admissions, but they probably have a good shot at getting an athletics scholarship. As mentioned earlier, there are stories of dogmen doing things like trying to use door handles to both cars and even houses to try and gain access. There are reports of them engaging in various activities, seemingly in a bid to lure people outside. These activities include things like tapping on windows, leaving deer carcasses in people's driveways, banging on the side of houses, etc. There are also stories of them throwing deer carcasses into the road in an attempt to make people crash their vehicles. Something that I've never heard reported even once is dogman using tools. Some people think this could be evidence of there being an upper limit to how smart these creatures are, but at the same time, when you're a super strong, super fast, 7-foot-tall apex predator with incredible senses, claws, and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, you might not necessarily need to use tools as badly as those weird, hairless primates that you see stumbling around in the woods. On the topic of tools that we like to use when it comes to evening the playing field with other apex predators, many eyewitnesses have said that these creatures seem to actually recognize firearms and know what they're used for when they see people carrying them. Guns do seem to deter them, and merely seeing one can cause a dogman to leave the scene in a hurry. Just as a little safety tip for your next camping trip. Some people think they might also recognize cameras, which might explain why we don't get more photos of them, but I'm really not sure cameras would necessarily have the same negative association for dogmen that actual weapons do. I think dogmen are definitely behind humans when it comes to raw intelligence. Well, I think they're behind most humans, but exactly how wide the gap is isn't entirely clear. They obviously haven't built any civilizations like we have, but at the same time, they've never needed tools, shelter, and agriculture in the same way that we do. We also don't know how variable dogman intelligence is. Anyone who spends time with animals can tell you that certain animals are smarter than other members of their species. I haven't seen it discussed too heavily, but there are likely certain dogmen that are smarter than other dogmen, and there's certain dogmen that are dumber. It's even possible that the only dogmen that people ever see are the ones that are dumb enough to let themselves be seen. A specific detail that appears in many Dogman Encounters are the glowing eyes that these things are said to possess. Now, wolves' eyes also glow by reflecting light that hits them, which allows them to see better in the dark. This is due to a layer of eye tissue they possess called a tapetum lucidum. People also report this trait in Bigfoot sightings, but interestingly enough, there are no known primates that have the tapetum lucidum. Now, what's really interesting is that some eyewitnesses have said that what they saw wasn't just the eye shine that canines and other animals that are recognized by science possess. What they saw was a dogman with eyes that seemed to genuinely glow like a light bulb. Some might write this off as them seeing things and their mind trying to process what's happening when they're face to face with a dogman, but remember, many of these eyewitnesses are people that are very familiar with the wildlife of North America. Many have even clarified that the way the dogman's eyes seem to glow is without a doubt something different from the eyeshine that wolves and other animals possess. Some people think that this is evidence that the dogmen aren't just natural animals, that there is something that really is unexplainable and supernatural, and that doesn't fit into our current understanding of science. The beliefs of dogman researchers fall on something of a sliding scale regarding how supernatural they think these creatures are. There's a similar sort of debate going on in the world of Bigfoot, with reports that portray the animals as more otherworldly in nature, being referred to as woo, a term I have no problem stealing for this discussion on Dogman. The woo camp for Dogman is proportionately larger than the woo camp for Bigfoot, compared to the people that favor the explanation of these creatures being natural animals, and I think there are a few reasons for this. The first is that Dogman is much more different from any known animal that Bigfoot is. We have a giant, potentially bipedal ape in the fossil record. It's known as Gigantopithecus blacki. As mentioned earlier, there aren't any 7-foot-tall bipedal canines with hands and muscular torsos in the fossil record, although the fossil record doesn't even account for a full 1% of all species that have ever lived on Earth. Additionally, to my knowledge, there aren't any figures in the Dogman community with a type of academic pedigree possessed by Grover Krantz or Jeffrey Meldrum. Big names in the Bigfoot world, PhDs, college professors, and experts in the field of primatology and evolutionary anthropology in the case of Krantz, and foot morphology and primate locomotion in the case of Meldrum. These two offered more legitimacy to the subject in the eyes of the public, and both fell into the more naturalist camp of Bigfoot believers. The fact that Dogman is more of a fringe subject, even in the world of cryptozoology, has meant that many people with reputations in academia are hesitant to touch it with an 11-foot pole. The Dogman community, outside of those whose belief in the creature began with an encounter, is also comprised of people that are already more open to the existence of other types of paranormal phenomena, which can in turn make them more open to believing in Dogman being something truly otherworldly and not just a natural but undiscovered animal. People on both sides of this argument tend to be very opinionated and sometimes even outright aggressive about where they stand on this issue, but hey, you can't spell Dogman without those first 5 letters. As far as what the people in the more woo camp think about Dogman, there are a number of different explanations that I've heard people on that side of the aisle give for what Dogmen actually are. The most common explanations I've heard from this part of the Dogman community is that Dogmen are some type of demonic entities, that they're the half-human, half-angel hybrids called Nephilim that are described in Genesis 6:4 in the Bible, that they're some type of non-corporeal forest spirits, that they're interdimensional beings, and similar theories exist for Bigfoot as an attempt to explain why he hasn't been discovered, that they're some type of alien, and if that's the case, well, I think I can live with leaving their planet unexplored. Or that there's some type of government experiment gone wrong, which wouldn't be the biggest waste of tax dollars I can think of or even name. There's some in the woo camp that think if it looks like a werewolf, walks like a werewolf, and quacks like a werewolf, well, it might just be an actual shape-shifting werewolf and not merely some natural animal that we have yet to identify. A lot of people in the woo camp think that all types of paranormal entities and phenomena are related in some way that humans don't understand. People refer to the connection that they think exists between these different aspects of the paranormal as high strangeness. This theory of high strangeness isn't based on nothing. There are places that are said to be Dogman hotspots or Bigfoot hotspots that also get loads of UFO reports, and at the same time are home to plenty of ghost sightings, but also have people report seeing strange orbs that vanish into the night. The woo camp does seem to have less of a consensus on a lot of things when it comes to Dogman than the naturalist camp does, which makes sense. The woo folks are split between the over half a dozen explanations for what these things are that I just listed. The naturalist camp tends to agree that they are natural animals, but whether or not they're known and believed to be extinct animals that are perfect suspects is up for debate among naturalists. The woo camp has largely risen from the number of people that have reported dogmen possessing attributes and engaging in behaviors that seem to completely set them apart from all known animals. People have claimed to, I repeat, claimed to, have seen dogmen do things like suddenly appear inside of their homes, only to vanish into thin air, be fired upon, only for the projectiles to pass straight through them. People have said that they experienced something called mind speak, where the dogman spoke to them telepathically, in their own language. Again, I'm just telling you what other people have stated. I'm not saying that I believe this to be the case. People have pointed towards the glowing eyes that many people report as evidence that these things cannot just be another natural creature. People think them not being fully corporeal could explain why we haven't been able to recover a body yet. There are also people who think their presence can interfere with electronics, which is why we haven't been able to gather more video or photographic evidence of Dogman. One of the stranger details that's cropped up in a few reports over the years is people saying that the Dogman they saw was wearing clothing. Now, obviously, we're not talking a full-on outfit like a cartoon wolf, but something like a tattered shirt or even pants has been reported. Now, there are only maybe a handful of reports that mention this, but it does make me wonder if there's something to them. I wouldn't say it necessarily supports the idea that Dogman can't just be another woodland creature. Chimps will sometimes put on clothes of their own free will, given the option, and in the past people did use clotheslines outdoors, even if nowadays they're a rarer sight than Dogman himself. If Dogmen really do have a sense of humor, they might just find some novelty in ripping down some clothes from a clothesline, and making themselves look like those humans they like to spook. There were also reports in the 1960s and 1970s of Sasquatches wearing flannel shirts specifically. I'm not joking, you can look this up. So it's not completely without precedent in the cryptid world. In addition to those that are firmly in the naturalist or woo camps, there's also a third party that's placed themselves somewhere in the middle. The centrist and moderates of the dogman world, you could say. They think that there are some dogmen that are clearly natural animals, and some that seem to truly not be of this world. The explanations that they pick for why there are stories that suggest these things are seemingly natural creatures, and other stories that suggest they're genuinely supernatural, vary. Some theorize that the reports of UFO activity overlapping with Dogman sightings are caused by extraterrestrial visitors having more interest in these creatures than other animals. If there is life on other planets that visits this one, I'm not overly familiar with how they make their decisions, but if I were a visitor at a planet-sized zoo, I have to imagine that watching some bipedal humanoid canines go through their day makes it a pretty solid source of entertainment. Another hypothesis that has popped up from people that believe in ghosts, spirits, specters, and other types of phenomena of that nature is that if there are reports of animal ghosts, well, maybe Dogman is a type of animal that can stay around after death. This theory would explain why there are some reports that suggest these creatures are intangible in some way, unable to be touched and having bullets pass right through them when fired upon. There are also some people who think that the people whose sightings point towards Dogman being a natural animal, and the people whose sightings point towards Dogman being some type of otherworldly paranormal entity, are actually seeing two different creatures that just both happen to resemble a Hollywood werewolf for reasons that are unknown to us. Personally, I would describe myself as in the naturalist camp, but I wouldn't completely write off the idea that there might be something more to the entity known as Dogman. Something that will get brought up a lot by people that research Dogman or make content about Dogman. At times there's much less overlap than I would like between those two groups, is the possibility that there's some sort of government cover-up regarding the existence of these creatures as an explanation for why we have yet to be able to find them. Some have even theorized that there are certain federal employees that are instructed to go online and intentionally spread disinformation about these creatures in order to muddy the waters and cause division within the community. I wonder how they explain that job when their kid's school has career day. There are stories of men in black that visit anyone claiming to have seen a Dogman, or even some type of top-secret special forces units that hunt down these creatures. Like I said earlier, the more action-packed an alleged cryptid sighting is, the more skeptical I am of it being true. My other problem is that if there were genuinely secret military forces dedicated to hunting Dogman, there wouldn't be any Dogmen. Humans are so good at wiping out animal species that we had to start passing laws to prevent us from doing it by accident. The reasons for this purported cover-up are unknown, but people have speculated all sorts of things, ranging from the government not wanting to hurt the American lumber and nature tourism industries by making the existence of these creatures public knowledge. My apologies to anyone working in those fields if this is the case and this video ends up going viral. The belief that discovering Dogman will somehow upend our understanding of science, that these creatures are some type of government experiment that has somehow gone wrong, that Dogmen are the guardians of some sort of paranormal phenomena. This theory is extremely popular in the woo camp, and I've even heard people assert that they've seen these guys walk out of portals Avengers Endgame style, which is quite the claim to say the very least. The belief that there's some type of demonic entity, the list is a mile long. Given the evidence that I've seen, I can't say there's enough out there for me to believe these stories. I think at a minimum there is some level of a cover-up, although not necessarily a vast and coordinated one. While I can't say I fully believe there's some type of shadowy, three-letter government agency that the public doesn't know about that's been tasked with handling these creatures, I think there are, without a doubt, park rangers that have seen and heard some pretty unbelievable things in the woods. I think that these people are told by either their superiors or more experienced coworkers that these animals get spotted every now and again, and that it's best to not ask questions. It'll result in more paperwork and more expenses for the department, and probably less job security for you. If someone tells you about seeing something that looks like a real-life werewolf, you tell them they saw a bear walking upright, or an unusually large wolf, or some other type of animal that is definitely not a hyper-intelligent bipedal canine. There are a number of stories from retired park rangers that say this is what happened when a camper told them they saw a Dogman, or more often a Bigfoot. There are multiple U.S. states that seem to have populations of big cats, jaguars, panthers, cougars, etc. that the departments of Fish and Wildlife for those states vehemently deny the existence of. These phantom big cats are also sighted in England and have been for a century. The government denied the existence of these big cats, but just this year, there was DNA confirmation of their existence. Now, there's a bit of a jump between known animals that aren't supposed to exist in certain areas actually residing there, and 7-foot-tall monsters with canine heads and bodies like gym rats, but it does show precedent for certain government agencies denying the existence of apex predator cryptids. Or maybe I'm only saying there's no mass cover-up because I'm trying to stay on Dogman's good side, and I don't want to suggest that he would need anyone's help to stay undetected. Now, one interesting explanation that's been suggested for what these creatures actually are is the possibility that, contrary to the name, Dogman isn't actually a type of canine. Now, all the Type 3s do seem to be more like primates, although where their claws and canine ears come from is anyone's guess. The canine types seemingly have to be just that, canines. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a canine variant that resembles a hyena, even though hyenas aren't canines. This means there is a precedent for canine dogmen that look like canines, but are actually a different type of animal. There are two theories for what these creatures could be if they aren't of canine origin. The first is that our dogmen are actually some type of raccoon men. This would explain why they seem to have hands, since raccoons have them, and there are no known canines that do. How a raccoon could have reached the size that these creatures are reported to be, I couldn't tell you. The other animal suspect, being the true identity of Dogman, would mean that both variants of Dogmen, Type 3s and canines, are primates, the suspect being the lemur. The Archaeoindrus fontoineti was a giant lemur that is said to have been the same size as a male gorilla and is believed to have gone extinct extremely recently, in 350 BC. Both lemurs and raccoons already having hands hypothetically makes them more similar to the descriptions of Dogman that we have than canines are. Lemurs also live in trees, which could explain the tree climbing that dogmen are said to do, and all their known canines just don't. These theories are interesting, but there are two problems that I have with them. The first is that their premise is that eyewitnesses see these creatures and in their panicked states assume they are some type of werewolf-like animal, since that's the closest equivalent they have to what they're seeing. But as I've said many times throughout this video, the people that encounter these things, they know what they saw. The second problem I have is if our dogmen really are raccoon men or lemur men, well, why do they act like canines? Why do they howl like dogs and run in packs? Why are there reports of them actually getting along with wolves? It's an interesting idea. It's just not one that I can believe in. While the majority of Dogman reports have come from North America, and even then, primarily the United States, there are a significant number of sightings that come from other countries, with Brazil being something of a hotspot in terms of global Dogman encounters. There are also an unusually high number of Dogman hoax attempts that come out of Brazil for reasons that I couldn't tell you. These international Dogman sightings are definitely interesting, to say the least. If these creatures aren't just a North American phenomenon, well, how are they able to remain hidden so easily? And where did they actually come from? I mean, it's not completely unheard of for a North American cryptid to have counterparts overseas. What we in the United States call Bigfoot is known as the Hibagon in Japan, the Aaron in China, the Yowie in Australia, the Almasty in Russia, the Yeti in Tibet, etc. The difference here is that Sasquatch's cousins overseas have documented sightings that literally go back centuries. With Dogman, the lines are a lot blurrier. There aren't really any historical Dogman sightings from overseas that have the same level of documentation. Some people argue that werewolf legends came from people trying to explain what they saw when they encountered a Dogman, but werewolves and myth and legend don't really match Dogman in the way that people's reports of giant hairy men that lived in the woods match contemporary descriptions of Bigfoot. I file these international Dogman sightings under the parts of this phenomenon that I'm intrigued by, if not necessarily convinced of the existence of. Another strange twist in the tale of Dogman are the cynocephali from ancient times. The cynocephali were said to be men with dogs' heads, but unlike the dogmen, they were described as literally just that, entities whose bodies were 100% just like a man's, but with canine heads. Reports of them came from areas like Greece, India, the Middle East, and parts of Eastern Europe. Now obviously there are countless stories of mythological creatures and monsters from all over the world. What sets the cynocephali apart from creatures like the Hydra, Medusa, the Cyclops, etc., is that specific people claim to have personally encountered them. People like Alexander the Great, Pliny the Elder, and even Marco Polo. All three of these men claim to be familiar with the cynocephali, and wrote about them in a very matter-of-fact manner, with Pliny the Elder even writing about them in his book, The Natural History, which can be called the world's first encyclopedia. The Christian saint known as St. Christopher was said to be a member of the Cynocephali. As you may have guessed from the name, St. Christopher is a Catholic and Eastern Orthodox saint that is said to have been martyred in the 3rd century, although it's disputed as to whether or not there is enough evidence to say he existed solely from what's in the historical record. He was said to be 7.5 feet tall and had a canine head, which later became a human one after he converted to Christianity and was baptized. In the 9th century, a monk actually wrote a letter on whether or not the Cynocephali have souls, since whether or not they do would affect whether or not the gospel should be preached to them in order for them to be saved. Again, this letter was written as if it were about creatures that really exist. Now what's interesting is that the Cynocephali weren't said to be werewolf-like entities, like dogmen are described as. They were said to just be really large men with canine heads. They seemed to be fully human from the neck down and had human-like hands and feet. They were also said to act much more like humans than Dogman does. They would wear clothing, use tools, and although they only communicated through barks and snarls, they were reported to be able to very clearly understand spoken language from humans. Some people have theorized that the Cynocephali were in reality just a tribe of people with hypertrichosis, a condition that causes hair to grow literally everywhere on a person's body, including the face. My issue with this theory is that it doesn't explain why the Cynocephali had snouts and communicated in barks. Although the Cynocephali don't seem to have been the same creatures that the Dogmen are, the potential existence of another non-human bipedal entity with a canine cranium is too significant to not bring up as part of the discussion. The biggest question that remains is, if the Cynocephali really did exist, well, where on earth did they go? Now, given everything that I've said, I'm sure that many of you are wondering, is Dogman dangerous? Well, these things very clearly have the capacity to be dangerous, given their physical and mental capabilities. Perhaps a better way of phrasing the question is simply, does Dogman attack humans? Obviously, there aren't any death certificates out there that list Dogman attack as the cause of death. This video would be a lot longer and contain a lot less speculation from me if that were the case. That being said, it's not out of the question that a Dogman has caused someone to leave this world and move on to the next one, and the death was chalked up to being an attack from a bear, some type of big cat, pack of wild dogs, etc., etc. Every now and again, you'll see a death caused by a wildlife attack that certain Dogman researchers believe was actually the work of the living lycanthrope. After all, I don't think too many coroners or medical examiners have studied what the aftermath of a Dogman attack looks like. The missing 411 phenomena refers to people that have gone missing in the United States national parks. Since their founding in 1916, more than 1,000 people have gone missing, never to be seen again. Now, while many of these disappearances have pretty clear-cut and mundane explanations, others seem to have occurred under extremely bizarre circumstances that don't seem to have any explanation. Experienced hikers turning a bend in the trail right in front of their companions and then vanishing without a trace. The reason that the phenomena is referred to as missing 411 is because of a man named David Paulides who first started to track these disappearances and looked for commonalities. He noticed that there seemed to be facts the public wasn't getting when it came to these disappearances. 411 is now outdated slang for information, and the name missing 411 comes from how there seemed to be missing information with the cases he was following. Now, due to how strange many of these disappearances are, people that are interested in all different types of unexplained phenomena will chalk the missing 411 phenomena up to whatever it is they're interested in. True crime people will say it's foul play. UFO enthusiasts will say it's alien abductions. Or traditional conspiracy theorists will say it's the government and the men in black. Bigfoot believers will say it's Sasquatch. Some people with more generally woo beliefs will say it's people slipping into other dimensions, etc., etc. While I'm not saying that without a doubt these disappearances are the work of a hungry dogman, I'm saying that I think the possibility exists that some of them potentially could be. There's this photo you may have seen going around online that shows two maps, one of disappearances and one of major cave systems in the United States. Now, this has led to a lot of speculation as to what this means with the missing 411 phenomena. Cave systems do often become popular tourist spots, and tourists visiting national parks are more likely to be hurt or go missing than experienced hikers or campers. But many of the people that have gone missing and been categorized under the missing 411 umbrella were very experienced outdoorsmen and women. Wolves in the wild do make their dens in caves. If the dogmen really exist, it would stand to reason that they might also have dens and use their caves as a base of operations, so to speak. There's one detail that's appeared in many people's Dogman encounters that really fascinates me, and I think has to be brought up in any discussion about how dangerous Dogman is. And that is the phrase, "it let me go." It's very, very rare for Dogman eyewitnesses to report the creature attacking. Hopefully that puts you at ease. But pretty much everyone that has been the victim of attack and lived to tell the tale has said that they believe the only reason they survived was because the creature seemed to just let them go, for reasons known only to the beast itself. There are other stories where people don't realize, or didn't realize at the time, the only reason they came out of their encounter alive was because the dogman wanted them to. But this is very clearly the case once you think about it. There are people that say they saw an angry dogman, but managed to outrun the beast. As mentioned earlier, there are numerous stories of these things keeping pace with vehicles on the highway. If a dogman wants you for dinner, running away just ensures that you'll die tired. No one knows exactly why Dogman has a habit of letting people live to tell the story of their encounter. But as I'm sure you can guess by now, there is some speculation as to why this is the case. As terrifying and physically capable as dogmen are, they don't have the numbers that humans do. They don't have the tools that humans do. All the fangs, claws, and muscle in the world can't beat a sufficiently determined group of humans with firearms. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not encouraging anyone to go after these creatures. There are always things worth living for. At the same time, I don't think these creatures like their chances against us when we're going all out. The dogmen are very smart. It's possible that to some extent, they know that if one of these weird hairless apes gets off in the woods, loads more show up, and the odds start to turn against the dogmen if a confrontation breaks out. Remember, these things are said to be extremely wary of firearms when they see someone packing heat. I'm sure any skeptics that are still watching are wondering, if these creatures are real, why haven't we found one? The question is more than fair, but there are a few things I think need to be kept in mind here. Even though there have been Dogman sightings all over America, we don't necessarily know how many of them there are out there. Although there have to be at least enough to maintain a breeding population, I think we can assume that the number isn't too much higher than it needs to be. Animal populations get smaller the higher up the food chain you go, and you can't go much higher than Dogman. Wolf hunting territories range anywhere from 50 miles to 1,000 in size. If the dogmen hunt in ranges that are as large, and likely even larger, well, it would stand to reason that these creatures are often on the move, which would make it more difficult for them to be successfully tracked and found. Many dogman eyewitnesses are of the opinion that they will always know you're there before you know they are, and if you see one, it's because it wanted you to. Canines have an exponentially better sense of smell than humans do, which will undoubtedly give these creatures an enormous advantage when it comes to staying one step ahead of us while we're deep in the woods. On the extreme, and I do mean extreme, off chance someone manages to catch a dogman unaware, there's another problem that arises from just how fast these creatures are reported to be. They're estimated to stand 7 feet tall on the lower end, and their legs are reported as being huge and muscular, allowing them to move a lot faster than any human sprinter. I've heard numbers anywhere from 40 to 60 miles per hour, and stories of them keeping pace with cars on the highway as mentioned earlier. They can have a much better mental map of the woods than whatever human they've encountered. Since they'll pretty much always have the home field advantage, this makes them practically impossible to track once they get going. That's not even going into the aforementioned tapetum lucidum, which will give them better sight in the dark than any human being that isn't wearing night vision goggles. And quite frankly, I don't know anyone that's either crazy enough or stupid enough to go running into the woods after a dogman. Going back to the topic of photographic evidence of dogman, many skeptics have brought up the question of why we haven't seen more pictures of these things, either from eyewitnesses or from them showing up on trail cams. Skeptics love to say that if creatures like dogman are real, we should have more high-quality photos of them, due to the fact that pretty much everyone in America keeps a smartphone with a camera on their person at all times. Let's look at this from the perspective of a dogman eyewitness. You've just come face to face with a real-life monster that goes against pretty much your entire understanding of the world. Snapping a picture probably isn't the first thought on your mind. Even when people do manage to take photos, taking a picture of wildlife with your phone is harder than you'd think. When it's an extremely fast predator and your main objective is just to survive, well then it's even harder still. Now onto the issue of trail cams. This is a question that those in the Bigfoot community are no stranger to, but I think with Dogman, there could potentially be a more straightforward answer as to why this is the case. As mentioned earlier, canines possess a truly incredible sense of smell, and if dogmen are canine creatures, it would stand to reason that they do as well. Canines have the ability to detect infrared by smelling it. If dogmen have similar capabilities, and I don't think it's too unreasonable to assume that they do, they will know about the presence of trail cameras before any photos can be taken. Now, I don't know if dogmen specifically avoid trail cams, but they might see them as evidence that they're in an area with a higher number of humans, and that it's time to tail it out of there. So okay, I've given an explanation for why we haven't found a living dogman yet, but what about a dead one? Many skeptics have made the argument that if these creatures really exist, we should have found a body by now, likely multiple bodies. If dogmen are all natural creatures, it stands to reason that they come into and out of the world the same way as every other animal. If we find other animals' remains in the woods, why don't we find dogman remains? Well, there are a few reasons for this. As I've mentioned before, and I'm likely going to mention a few more times in this video, whatever dogman population exists is likely not more than a few thousand on the absolute high end. To put this into perspective, there are hundreds of thousands of bears in North America, and a human finding a bear carcass is still an incredibly rare occurrence. There are a few reasons for why bears that have shed their mortal coils are such an uncommon sight. The first is that almost immediately after animals die in the woods, scavengers will quickly swoop in to get a quick and easy dinner, breaking down the bodies in the process. Animal bones are a great source of calcium, if whole milk isn't your thing, and rodents are all too eager to make it seem as if a deceased creature had never been there at all. In addition to actions taken by other forest creatures to speed up the decomposition process for deceased animals, things like weather and acidic soil help to break the bodies down even further. These factors combine to create the perfect environment for dogman cadavers to disappear very quickly, well before any humans stumble across them. It's also possible that individual dogman bones are seen by people in the woods. Finding full animal skeletons is very rare, and that it doesn't even register for them what they've stumbled across. Remember, most people have never even heard of dogman, and if they see animal bones, I don't think they're going to jump to real-life werewolf as their first guess. Another argument against the existence of dogman that gets brought up by skeptics is that they should have a very noticeable effect on their ecosystems and the animal populations they hunt for either prey or sport. This is another fair criticism, but I think there are a few things that should be kept in mind here. As mentioned earlier, for an animal species that's the apex of apex predators like the dogman are, their populations are going to be very small compared to other animal species that are further down the food chain. In terms of the population sizes for these prey species, there are over 35 million deer in North America, about 1 million elk, over 90 million cows with hundreds going missing and unrecovered every year, millions of wild rabbits, about 1 million moose, the many millions of outdoor pets that are said to disappear around the same time dogmen are sighted, and so on and so forth. If there is a relatively small population of a few hundred to possibly a few thousand dogmen that roam the forests of North America, it is very possible for them to feast on whatever prey they've got a hankering for, without necessarily having a large impact on the populations of those food sources. Roadkill is also said to be a favorite meal for dogman, and that wouldn't necessarily make too much of a difference on overall animal populations. It's not like the dogman's killing them a second time. Another question worth discussing is whether or not dogman is even limited to animals that we would describe as prey. After all, if these things really are as physically and mentally capable as eyewitnesses describe, could they feast on other predators? There are stories of dogmen deciding that animals that most people think would be at the top of the food chain aren't off menu for them. On the other hand, there is one story that's fairly well known in dogman circles about a dogman starting a fight with a black bear and having to leave with his tail literally and metaphorically tucked between his legs, never to return. This remains the only story I'm familiar with of a dogman outright losing a one-on-one fight with a wild animal that's recognized by the scientific community. A point that has been brought up by many dogman skeptics, even those that are very open to the existence of other cryptids such as Bigfoot, is that there doesn't seem to be an evolutionary pathway for these creatures to exist. There are no known canines alive today or in the fossil record that have hands or the ability to move upright in the same way that dogman is said to. Dogs or wolves walking on their hind legs look pretty goofy, and the way they move doesn't really resemble the locomotion that people report from these creatures. There aren't even any canines in the fossil record that are the same size as the 400-something pound dogman. At the same time, the fossil record isn't anywhere near complete. It's estimated that less than 1% of all animals to ever live on this planet are present, and it's far, far less than 1%. The reason for the fossil record being so incomplete is that most animals don't live in areas that are conducive towards the creation of fossils. Fossils are formed when animals are buried in sediment before they decompose. Fossils don't form in every area, so as a result, animals that don't live in the right environments don't show up very often in the fossil record. In fact, we didn't have fossil evidence of chimpanzees until 2005 due to the conditions they lived in not being right for fossil formation. While there are no canines in the fossil record nearly as large as the Dogman, the biggest canine in there is the Epicene haydeni, which weighed about 250 pounds on average, and the heaviest individual specimen we have, bone of, likely weighed about 370 pounds. It would have measured 8 feet from end to end and about 3 feet at the shoulder. While this is smaller than your typical Dogman, it does mean there's at least something of a precedent for a gigantic canine. Scientists say that the Epicene haydeni actually lived in what is now the United States of America, which has led some Dogman researchers to believe that the living lycanthrope is actually related to the extinct species in some way. The current prevailing belief among scientists is that Epicene haydeni died out a little over 5 million years ago due to being out-hunted by the big cats they shared the area with. They went after the same type of prey, but the superior speed and agility of big cats gave them the advantage over the Epicene haydeni. Still, the question remains how canines that have hands and are able to easily move bipedally would have developed these adaptations in the first place. While scientists believe that humans started walking on 2 legs for a number of reasons, being able to see further, freeing our hands to use tools, exposing less of our bodies to the sun, moving bipedally is more energy efficient than moving quadrupedally, etc. Now, as mentioned earlier, Dogman doesn't strictly move on 2 legs. There are 2 types of bipeds: obligate bipeds like humans, and facultative bipeds like gorillas, chimps, baboons, etc. Now, what's interesting is that from what eyewitnesses described, Dogman doesn't seem to really fit into either of these categories. Obligate bipeds like humans can't really move efficiently on all 4s. There's a reason high school football coaches around the country like to use bear crawls as a form of conditioning and/or collective punishment. Facultative bipeds like gorillas, chimps, baboons, etc. can move bipedally, but their bipedal movement is clearly not their natural method of locomotion. Dogman's bipedal movement is said to be incredibly smooth and graceful, and their quadrupedal movement is also said to be very fast and very natural looking. As far as whether or not canines could evolve to start walking upright, one of the reasons they currently cannot is because their knees don't lock like humans do, which allows us to stand and walk for long periods of time without our leg muscles being overwhelmed. Our knees are able to lock due to the way that our femurs are angled. While facultative bipeds have straight femurs, humans have femurs that are angled medially, which puts our knees closer together, making them under our center of gravity. Now, there is one detail I mentioned earlier that I think could be part of the explanation for why Dogman doesn't seem to move like either an obligate or facultative biped. But nearly every single Dogman eyewitness that's seen these creatures switch from bipedal movement to quadrupedal movement, or vice versa, has mentioned, is hearing a cracking noise when they did so. Maybe it's possible that their physiology allows them to shift their femurs from straight to medially angled and vice versa, and the cracking noise is what happens when they do that. There aren't any known mammals that are able to do this, but Dogman isn't a known mammal, and we currently don't have a skeletal system that we can look at. Being both bipedal and quadrupedal could also provide a more likely evolutionary path than a canine species that is purely bipedal. A series of different types of mutations or adaptations that allow these creatures the option of bipedal movement, while still allowing for quadrupedal movement, would take less time to occur and would likely be more beneficial when it comes to surviving and competing for resources, given that you're basically getting the best of both worlds in that scenario. It's also possible that even when walking upright, their femurs aren't angled quite as well as humans are. Loads and loads of Dogman eyewitnesses have made a point of mentioning how muscular the Dogman's legs were. Where these creatures might develop muscular upper bodies from time spent in the trees, their leg muscles being put under constant stress while walking upright could make for a pretty good alternative to the squat rack. Dogman having hands also raises some questions. Scientists say that one of the reasons that humans evolved to move bipedally is that it frees up the hands. This suggests that having hands is an adaptation that would always predate bipedal movement. It's said that the reason primates developed hands is because it allowed them to grasp branches when they were living in the trees. As mentioned earlier, there are many reports of dogmen climbing trees and even swinging from some very sturdy branches, suggesting that they could have had a need for such an adaptation at some point in their development. Like with bipedal locomotion, if dogmen actually are descended from the Ephesian-Haydeni, a series of mutations and adaptations over a very long period of time that granted them the advantages provided by having hands could have allowed them to survive to the modern day. Once again, competition with big cats or not. Now, the number of people that see Dogman every year seems to be rising. Emphasis on seems to be. An interesting question that a lot of people have raised is whether the number of Dogman sightings that occur every year is actually increasing, or if it's just the number of reported Dogman sightings that is increasing every year, or if people are just lying. Dogman's rise to prominence has largely occurred in a post-internet world, which may have created the perfect conditions for him to become more well-known. The internet allows you to stay anonymous, and when you're talking about your encounter with a 7-foot-tall real-life werewolf, more than a few people prefer to not attach their names and faces to their stories, which I think is pretty understandable. It has also allowed these stories to reach a much wider audience than they would have in the past. By removing the barriers to entry that existed with legacy media like television, anyone with a story about these creatures that captivates the mind of those online can quickly see it spread around. Another benefit to the rise of the internet is it allows Dogman eyewitnesses to get context for what they saw. If you go online and search up phrases like "I saw a werewolf in real life" or "werewolves in North America," you'll get Dogman-related results on page 1 of Google. A lot of secondhand Dogman reports involve the person relaying the story saying that they heard it from their parents, grandparents, aunt, uncle, what have you. The eyewitness called it a werewolf or some other name. I've heard people refer to them as things like bearcats or dog-faced boogers. Bearcats because of their great speed and agility despite their size, boogers because of their bodies having something of a resemblance to a variety of Sasquatch called a wood booger, short for woodland boogeyman, but with a canine head. Other people say that the relatives just described the creatures as giant wolves that could walk on 2 legs. The people sharing the story that they were told will often say that the eyewitness said they were reluctant to share the story with others out of fear of ridicule. The internet allowing for Dogman stories to quickly reach a wider audience is of course a double-edged sword. Made-up stories can spread just as quickly as genuine ones, sometimes even more quickly. This means that there are 3 possibilities for what's happening. The number of Dogman sightings is increasing, the number of sightings is the same but a greater proportion of them are reported, or that a greater number of people are lying about having Dogman encounters. Personally, I think that all 3 could be the case here. Starting off with the most obvious, the liars. Dogman is gaining traction online and becoming more mainstream within paranormal and cryptozoological circles. As more people become aware of the existence of these creatures, you are going to attract the attention of the same pranksters, hoaxers, and grifters that have plagued the world of Bigfoot for decades. The internet has given people a platform to spread phony stories for fun and profit, and many are all too eager to take advantage of this fertile breeding ground for deception. The next aspect of this increase in reported sightings is that the percentage of sightings that gets reported is going up in the online age. As awareness of Dogman increases, people feel less stigma about coming forward and sharing their stories. An eyewitness is more likely to come forward and report that they saw a cryptid that thousands of other people have reported than they are to come out and say they saw what seems to be a real-life werewolf. Although the word more in the phrase more likely is honestly doing a lot of work here. The final aspect of the rise in the number of reported Dogman sightings year over year is the possibility that the number of Dogman encounters happening annually is actually increasing. The United States population in 2000 was 282 million. As of the time of this recording, it is now 335 million. Some Dogman researchers have speculated that deforestation has led to an increase in sightings, as these creatures are being forced out of hiding, but while researching this video I was pleasantly surprised to learn that the amount of forested land in America has actually been steadily increasing for decades. However, camping is becoming a more popular activity, and I think it is likely that there's an uptick in sightings being driven by humans wandering into Dogman territory, rather than them being forced into ours, and the way that these creatures react to seeing us certainly seems to suggest that this is the case. Some people also theorize that this is why dogmen try and scare us, one way or another, they just want humans to leave them alone, and fear of being eaten by a giant wolf man is a pretty strong motivator for finding somewhere else to set up camp. A question that more than a few people have asked is whether or not a dogman has ever actually been killed by a human or humans. Has anyone ever managed to put the ultimate hunting trophy on their wall, or turned a dogman into a rug? It's tough to say. Obviously, if humans have taken out dogmen, it's still very, 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 very far from being a common occurrence. There are lots of stories floating around online claiming that there are these secret military units that hunt these things down, but I have a pretty hard time believing those tales. While many dogman reports come from hunters who were armed at the time, there are a few things that would make it difficult for them to both kill a dogman and then bring the body back for research purposes. The first is, as mentioned earlier, dogmen seem to recognize firearms. If a dogman decides to bolt as soon as it sees a gun, you're probably not hitting it as it leaves, and you're definitely not catching up. There's also the issue of dogmen running in packs, and if you do somehow manage to take out one of these guys, you might not have enough bullets left over for his buddies. When you keep in mind how strong these creatures' senses likely are, and how they can detect our presence from a lot further away than we can detect their presence, I wouldn't be terribly shocked to learn that there has been someone at some point in time who killed a dogman, but the rest of the pack ensured that he didn't live to tell the story. There's one story that's fairly well known within the dogman community, from someone claiming that his uncles managed to kill one by getting it caught in bear traps, and then just firing on the creature until it stopped moving. He said that his uncles actually showed him the dogman's body afterwards, so he'd be less scared of the creatures, before cutting it up, scattering the body parts around as a warning to the other dogmen. They didn't go to the media or any scientists. They just dealt with a local wildlife problem and then went on with their lives. Of all the more action-packed dogman stories out there, this one is probably the only one that I really find believable, even if I wouldn't say that I'm completely sold. I think that what it does show is that if a human has ever killed a dogman and lived to tell about it, what type of person is the most likely candidate? It's very likely someone very comfortable with firearms, hunter, current or ex-military, law enforcement, etc., that lives in a pretty remote, rural area, since that's where most sightings take place. The vast majority of people that have had dogman encounters don't want attention about it, unlike a lot of people that claim to have had dogman encounters. It's not completely out of the question that at some point, somewhere in North America, a particularly skilled and brave gun owner has somehow managed to put down a dogman and just decided to leave it at that without telling the media. No matter how revolutionary the discovery could potentially be for our understanding of the world, or even the fame and fortune that would come from being the first person to bag a dogman and tell the world that they did. Some popular topics of conversation within the dogman community are whether or not we will ever actually manage to find definitive proof of these creatures, be that videos, photographs, DNA, etc., whether or not we'll ever recover a body, and whether or not we'll ever be able to deepen our knowledge of dogman, studying these animals in the same way that we're able to study other apex predators. These are all good questions that don't seem to have good answers at this moment. Definitive proof I could see happening, but how much more we'll be able to learn about these creatures is a different story entirely. It seems pretty unlikely that there's going to be a Jane Goodall for dogman, just given humans' desire for self-preservation. An issue that's always going to exist with studying these creatures is how intelligent they are. They will know if we're trying to study them, and they might not necessarily like that we are. One thing that everyone in the dogman community can agree on is that dogmen know how to avoid human detection. They can very easily evade us if they want to. Hypothetically, I think the only way we could really study a dogman is by filling it up with tranquilizers and then putting it in some type of containment cell. And I don't think that anybody is volunteering to be involved in a single step of that plan. It also wouldn't give us any insights into how these creatures behave in the wild. Only studying animals in captivity can lead to misconceptions, such as the myth of alpha wolves that I discussed earlier. For the foreseeable future, it seems our knowledge of these animals is going to be limited to what we can get secondhand from those unfortunate enough to have encounters with the real-life werewolf, known as Dogman. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching till the end. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to me for the past couple hours, and learned more about the real-life monster known as Dogman. Maybe you've started to believe that the beast really exists, a living, breathing werewolf prowling the most remote forests of North America. Maybe you haven't. I can't always bat 1,000. But if you really, truly think he's not out there, why don't you go camping deep in the woods in states like Michigan, Tennessee, Kentucky, or Mississippi? Go alone and wait until the sun goes down. In the dead of night, you might hear the whole forest go dead silent, followed by impossibly heavy breathing, the footsteps of a towering figure, branches snapping, howls that don't match any known animal. And then you might start to wonder if there's actually some truth to these Dogman stories after all. Sleep tight.